What if I told you that during the American Civil War, one of the greatest threats to soldiers wasn't bullets or bayonets, but the very medicine designed to save them? What if the doctors themselves were administering a poison that could destroy minds, disfigure faces, and drive men to the brink of insanity? Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into one of the darkest chapters of Civil War medicine, the story of mercury, calomel, and the blue mass pills that turned healing into horror. This is the tale of how good intentions, medical ignorance, and a toxic metal combined to create a nightmare for thousands of soldiers on both sides of the conflict. By the end of this video, you'll understand why a Confederate surgeon simplified his entire practice to one question: why Abraham Lincoln may have suffered from the very medicine he took for melancholy, and why the saying, "one night with Venus brings a lifetime with Mercury," became a grim reality for countless young men. Let's get into it. To understand the Mercury catastrophe, we first need to understand the medical nightmare that was the Civil War. When the first shots were fired at Fort Sumter in April 1861, neither the Union nor the Confederacy was prepared for what was about to unfold. The scale of the conflict was unprecedented. Over 620,000 soldiers would die during the war, but here's the shocking truth. 2 out of every 3 deaths weren't caused by combat. They were caused by disease. Let me repeat that. For every soldier killed by a bullet or cannonball, 2 more died from illness. Think about that for a moment. The 9th Louisiana Infantry is a perfect example. Of their 1,074 men, 233 were killed in battle, but 349 died of disease. The medicine, or lack thereof, was killing more men than the enemy. The camps were death traps. Imagine thousands of men cramped together in tented encampments with no understanding of germ theory, no antibiotics, and sanitation practices that would make a medieval peasant cringe. Soldiers were required to bathe once a week, but almost universally ignored this rule. Mountains of manure from horses, mules, and cattle piled up. The entrails of slaughtered animals rotted in the sun. Human waste was everywhere. Latrines were supposed to be dug and covered daily, but they were often placed upstream from water sources or near wells. Modest soldiers avoided the open latrines entirely, relieving themselves wherever they could find privacy. The result? Contamination everywhere. Flies swarmed over feces and then landed on food. Mosquitoes bred in swamps near encampments. Water sources became cesspools of bacteria. Diseases spread like wildfire. Dysentery, diarrhea, typhoid, cholera, pneumonia, measles, smallpox, malaria, and yellow fever. Dysentery alone was the single greatest killer of Civil War soldiers. They called it the flux, the Tennessee trots, or simply the runs. As one surgeon bluntly put it, no matter what else a patient had, he had diarrhea. Into this medical hellscape stepped doctors, armed with treatments that were often more dangerous than the diseases themselves. And the most popular medicine of all? Mercury. Now, before we judge the doctors of the Civil War too harshly, we need to understand the context. Mercury had been used in medicine for over 1,000 years. As early as 900 AD, physicians were using mercury to treat their patients. By the 1800s, it was considered a miracle drug. Mercury-based medicines were prescribed for an astonishing array of ailments: tuberculosis, syphilis, toothaches, constipation, typhoid fever, parasites, depression, cholera, skin diseases, liver disease, diarrhea, dysentery, and even teething pain in babies. If you were sick in the 1860s, chances are your doctor would prescribe mercury in some form. The most common mercury medications were calomel and blue mass. Calomel was mercurous chloride, a white powder that could be mixed with sweet substances like licorice or sugar and taken as a pill. Blue mass, or blue pills, was a mixture of mercury, licorice, rose leaves, and honey. It could be taken orally, absorbed through the skin, or inhaled as a vapor. Here's the problem. There was no standardization of dosing. Nobody knew how much mercury each pill contained. And nobody understood that mercury was slowly poisoning their patients. But wait, you might ask, why did doctors keep using it if it was poison? Because it seemed to work. When mercury was applied to the skin, it burned. When taken internally, it caused immediate and dramatic effects: sweating, excessive salivation, and violent diarrhea. The mucous membranes went into overdrive. To doctors operating under the miasma theory of disease, which held that illness was caused by bad air and impurities in the body, these symptoms looked like a cure. They believed the body was purging itself of the sickness. They thought the mercury was forcing out the disease. The reality was far more sinister. The body wasn't purging disease. It was desperately trying to expel poison. A Confederate surgeon named William H. Taylor perfectly captured the absurd simplicity of Civil War medicine. After the war, he wrote that he had simplified sick call to one question: how are your bowels? If they were open, he administered opium to stop them. If they were closed, he gave them blue mass to open them. Mercury, mercury, and more mercury. The most famous patients who took mercury: President Abraham Lincoln, who took blue mass before and during his presidency, possibly for constipation and depression. Author Louisa May Alcott, who contracted typhoid while nursing Union soldiers and was treated with calomel. And Clara Barton, the legendary Civil War nurse who was prescribed mercury in 1868 for stomach ailments. None of them fared well. Alcott later wrote, "I was never ill before this time and never well afterward." So what exactly did mercury do to these soldiers? The effects were absolutely devastating, and they varied depending on how the mercury was administered. When taken orally in small doses, calomel was actually the safest form of the drug. Most of the mercury wouldn't absorb through the intestines and would be excreted through urine and stool. But there was a catch. Some of it would oxidize into a form that could be absorbed, and that's when the nightmare began. Mercury is corrosive to the skin, eyes, and gastrointestinal tract. It can induce kidney failure. But the worst effects were on the central nervous system and the brain. Mercury has a high affinity for sulfur, so it binds with amino acids like methionine, cysteine, and taurine. Once in the bloodstream, mercury passes through the blood-brain barrier and accumulates in the brain tissue. The powdered forms of mercury used for inhalation were far more toxic. When soldiers breathed in mercury vapors, the poison went directly into their bloodstream and then to their brains. The effects could be catastrophic. The most visible horror was what mercury did to the mouth and face. Just a few blue mass pills per day contained more than 100 times the safe amount of daily mercury absorption. This caused extreme salivation. Soldiers would drool uncontrollably, producing so much saliva they couldn't swallow it all. Their gums became inflamed and swollen. Their teeth loosened and fell out. But it got worse. Ulcers formed in the mouth. These weren't ordinary sores. These ulcers ate away at bone and tissue, boring through the jaw and cheek. The result? Hideous facial deformities. Men who survived the war returned home with holes in their faces, their jaws partially dissolved, their appearance so shocking that family members recoiled in horror. One documented photograph shows a Private Carlton Bergen, whose face was devastated by mercury corrosion. The image is difficult to look at even today. Then there were the digestive effects. Calomel caused what doctors called explosive diarrhea and projectile vomiting. This dehydrated dysentery patients even more, often killing men who might have otherwise recovered. Remember, these soldiers already had severe diarrhea from bacterial infections. The mercury made it catastrophically worse. One tragic case was recorded in medical journals. A soldier with typhoid dysentery was treated with lead acetate pills, opium pills, mercury pills, and an opiate enema. He died within 24 hours. The treatment killed him faster than the disease. But the most insidious effects were neurological. Mercury poisoning attacks the nervous system and brain, causing symptoms that would have been interpreted as madness in the 1860s. Soldiers exposed to mercury experienced tremors and uncontrollable shaking, severe mood swings and emotional instability, memory loss and confusion, hallucinations and delusions, violent outbursts and aggression, severe depression and anxiety, cognitive decline, and inability to focus. In an era that didn't understand mental illness, these men would have been seen as having lost their minds. They were going insane, but not from the trauma of war alone. They were being driven mad by the medicine meant to cure them. Imagine being a 19-year-old farm boy from Ohio. You survive the Battle of Gettysburg. You contract dysentery in camp. The surgeon gives you mercury pills. Within weeks, you can't stop shaking. You drool constantly. Your teeth fall out. You can't remember your own mother's name. You have violent mood swings. You see things that aren't there. You become a different person, a stranger to yourself and your family. This was the reality for thousands of Civil War soldiers. One of the most common uses for mercury was treating venereal disease, particularly syphilis, and this created its own special kind of hell for soldiers. Prostitution was rampant around Civil War army camps. Young men, far from home and facing death daily, sought comfort where they could find it. The result was an epidemic of sexually transmitted diseases on both sides of the conflict. The standard treatment: mercury. Doctors would administer mercury in various forms, sometimes for months or even years. The saying among soldiers was grimly accurate: "One night with Venus brings a lifetime with Mercury." Here's the cruel irony. Syphilis itself, left untreated, attacks the brain and nervous system in its late stages, causing dementia, personality changes, and madness. But the mercury treatment also attacked the brain and nervous system, causing similar symptoms. So a soldier with syphilis faced a terrible choice: die slowly from the disease or be slowly poisoned by the cure. Many experienced the worst of both worlds, suffering from both syphilis and mercury poisoning simultaneously. Their minds deteriorated from two different sources, making it impossible for doctors to know which was the real culprit. This dual assault on the nervous system may have driven some soldiers to complete mental collapse. They weren't just battle-shocked or traumatized. They were being chemically lobotomized by toxic metals. The mercury treatments were so aggressive that patients often developed new symptoms that were worse than the original disease. But doctors, operating under the belief that more aggressive treatment meant better results, simply increased the dosage. They were drowning their patients in poison. Not everyone was blind to the dangers of mercury. As the Civil War progressed, some medical professionals began to question the widespread use of mercury-based medicines. In 1853, a decade before the war, Dr. Samuel Jackson had published a paper describing the harmful effects of calomel on children. He documented gangrene on the skin, loss of teeth, and deterioration of the gums, but his warnings were largely ignored. Then came a pivotal moment in 1863. Surgeon General William A. Hammond made a bold and controversial decision. On May 4, 1863, he issued an order stating that calomel would no longer be used in the Union Army. He had concluded that it was being abused by soldiers and physicians alike, and that it was doing more harm than good. Hammond's decision was revolutionary. He was effectively challenging centuries of medical tradition and the entire medical establishment. The backlash was swift and severe. Many doctors were outraged. How dare he question their judgment? How dare he remove one of their most trusted tools? The controversy was so intense that Hammond was eventually fired from his position as Surgeon General. His career was destroyed, but history would prove him right. However, here's the sad truth. Even after Hammond's order, mercury use continued. The Confederacy never stopped using it. And even in the Union Army, enforcement was inconsistent. Many regimental surgeons simply ignored the order and continued prescribing mercury. They believed in it too strongly to give it up. Calomel and blue mass continued to be used long after the Civil War ended. It was still being prescribed in the 1890s and even into the early 20th century. Calomel was marketed as a cure-all and used as teething medication for children until the 1950s. Think about that. Children born in the 1940s might have been given mercury for teething pain. It took decades for the medical community to fully accept what we now know beyond any doubt. Mercury is a poison, and it has no place in routine medical treatment. The mercury crisis of the Civil War left scars that lasted generations. Soldiers who survived the war often carried the effects of mercury poisoning for the rest of their lives. Many veterans experienced ongoing neurological problems, tremors, memory issues, personality changes, and cognitive decline. Some became alcoholics as they self-medicated to cope with the lingering effects. Others simply withdrew from society, unable to function normally or maintain relationships. Their families suffered too. Mercury can pass through the placenta, affecting unborn children. Veterans who had been heavily dosed with mercury may have unknowingly harmed their own children. The poison could span generations. The facial disfigurements were permanent. No surgery could restore a jaw eaten away by mercury-induced ulcers. These men lived the rest of their lives as living reminders of medical ignorance and the horrors of Civil War medicine. But there's a broader lesson here that extends far beyond the Civil War. The mercury catastrophe shows us the danger of medical hubris, of being so confident in our treatments that we refuse to question them even when the evidence of harm is staring us in the face. For over 1,000 years, mercury was considered medicine. Brilliant doctors, well-intentioned physicians, and dedicated healers all prescribed it. They truly believed they were helping their patients, but they were wrong, catastrophically, tragically wrong. It makes you wonder, what are we doing today that future generations will look back on with the same horror? What medicines, what treatments, what procedures do we consider standard practice that will one day be revealed as harmful? The story of Civil War mercury is also a reminder of the importance of medical reform and the courage required to challenge established practice. William Hammond was fired for trying to stop the use of calomel. He was attacked, ridiculed, and had his career destroyed. But he was right, and eventually the world came around to his view. Progress in medicine often requires people willing to stand up against the consensus, to question authority, and to put patient welfare above tradition. Hammond was one of those people. There should be more like him. So there you have it. The drug that drove Civil War soldiers insane wasn't some mysterious compound or exotic poison. It was mercury, one of the most trusted medicines of the era, prescribed by doctors who genuinely wanted to help. The soldiers who survived the battlefield often faced a second enemy in the form of their own medical care. They were given pills that loosened their teeth, dissolved their jaws, destroyed their digestive systems, and attacked their brains. Some lost their minds not to the horrors of war, but to the horrors of medicine. The next time you visit a Civil War battlefield or memorial, remember this. Beneath those rows of white headstones lie men killed not just by bullets and bayonets, but by blue pills and white powder. Killed by a miracle cure that was really a slow-acting poison. The story of Civil War mercury is a sobering reminder that good intentions are not enough in medicine. We need science, evidence, and the humility to admit when we're wrong. We need to be willing to change our practices even when it's difficult, even when it challenges everything we thought we knew. The soldiers of the Civil War deserved better. They deserved medicine that actually healed. Instead, they got mercury, and many paid the price with their sanity, their health, and their lives. If you found this video interesting, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history's darkest chapters. Drop a comment below and let me know. What other Civil War topics would you like me to cover? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.